So I'm very excited. We've got Laurence and Tim joining us for the next 30 or so minutes, who are going to share some of their sort of real-life experiences from their roles, senior roles, at industrial companies in Europe, and how they've dealt with what's going on at the moment. I would ask them to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background and put some context in there shortly. But perhaps if I set the scene a little bit to kick off the discussion. And I do have 4 hours of questions, but I am going to keep it to the 34 minutes that we've got left. So look, just to set the scene, I think it's an understatement to say it's been a fairly eventful last 3 years in Europe, both within the energy market, industrial volatility, and the energy transition. But I think one of the points that we noticed was that it seemed a very European response to use the energy transition as a solution to the energy security crisis going forward. Now, you've both been in those important positions at large industrial companies. So perhaps if you could sort of bring out some of the examples that you've seen there and what's going on in Europe. So I think just turning to you, Laurence, first of all, probably renewable energy in some of your roles there. And what's that role been in terms of sort of mitigating this energy security crisis that we're facing?
So I would say, first of all, a short introduction. I'm chair at Voltalia, which is an IPP, a little bit similar to what David has described, but in Europe, but also in Latin America. I'm also the chair at Globelec, which is another IPP, but in Africa, with a lot of thermal power. And I'm also on the board of Siemens Energy, which is clearly an equipment manufacturer, very involved in the energy transition with both grid, gas, and wind turbines. Also a little bit of hydrogen on the side. So I'm seeing it from different perspectives and more as a NED rather than as a executive operational day-to-day. But I would say when the energy crisis hit, there was an emphasis on building as fast as possible, and Voltalia, for example, was building solar and wind as quickly as possible, and trying to benefit also from the high power prices that we were experiencing. I have to say that at Siemens Energy, the backlog has gone significantly longer. And we are now, since the start of the energy crisis, with about a 4-year backlog on grid equipment. And even on gas, the business which we thought was not going to be so vibrant, it's been booming, including in Europe. So it's been a little bit of a surprise and changing dynamics. I would also point to the fact that we had a big supply chain disconnect where solar panels in particular, but also wind turbine costs just spiked up. And a lot of people, a lot of developers and a lot of utilities that had committed to sell at a certain price had to walk that back because the price of the equipment had gone up significantly and very suddenly. Some managed to renegotiate, some didn't, and some got stuck in the middle. And it was the emergence of more prevalence of a merchant price as opposed to long-term PPAs, which had been the mainstay of the renewable industry up to then. So there's been that shift that's happened. More capacity on the ground, but a shift in a price disconnect, people walking back from their commitments, and also the emergence of a merchant market.
Okay. So Tim, Laurence mentioned high power prices, high energy prices there. Perhaps if you could give a little bit of background on Currenta and how that affects the German industry and your business on the other side of that.
Very well, yes. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and to talk to you about our German problems and the way how we try to solve them. Now, what is Currenta? Currenta is the operator and the owner of the infrastructure of what was originally Bayer Leverkusen, the big chemical, pharma, and industrial park with 3 sites in Dormagen, Leverkusen, and Krefeld-Uerdingen. Today, these are more than 70 customers of us. Bayer was split up into many pieces. Those customers are working on an international, worldwide basis in their special fields. 55,000 employees are left here on these 3 sites. And the 3 sites have an area comprising an area of 11 square kilometers. Therefore, I always say there's just no room for nationalism or racism. The values we are carrying here on our side are really, besides sustainability, is tolerance and diversity. But I may also add what is then Currenta operating here on these 3 sites. It's the energy supply, it's steam, it's electricity, it's cooling. But then we are also working on logistics. We are giving the fire brigades, the safety to the plants, and much more. But from all of this, sustainable, reliable, and most important, a competitive energy supply is really the challenge for today and for the future for the chemical industry. And the second question you asked is about the impact of the high prices on the German industry. Let me point out how important energy prices are for our customers. Generally speaking, about 20% of the overall cost of a chemical company is energy costs. And secondly, our 3 sites stand for 1% of the overall energy consumption within Germany. So this is quite a volume. And we are not here talking about electricity. 80% of our energy consumption is going into steam and cooling. Chemistry is all about cooking. The only thing you have to bear in mind is not to lick on the spoon afterwards. But this is, let me say, pretty much what our business is all about. And I'm not talking about energy costs, I'm not talking about energy prices and not about commodity prices. I'm really talking about the overall energy costs. Why is this the case? If we compare the energy costs in Germany for an industry company, they are 3 times as high as in the United States or in Canada or in many other worldwide industry-heavy regions in the world. And we do not suffer so much from the commodity price, which is the costs for producing the energy is pretty much the same. The Ukrainian crisis is over, gas prices came down. To produce renewable energy is as expensive in Germany as somewhere else in the world. But what is really hurting us is the amount of taxes, levies, the system costs, the inefficiency in our system, which makes which burdens us with such high costs. And this is, to be very blunt, very open, and very self-reflecting. The Deutsche Energiewende, the German Energiewende, has been managed very poorly. And that is the result out of it, what we are seeing today. And of course, our homemade problems, as just described, they are superimposed by weak demand, geopolitical issues, and so on. But for us, priority number 1 is really the energy cost. The third part of your question is then what can be mitigation actions taken in response. And we have been, for the last years, have been looking on a 2-way approach. So one is, of course, crisis management, as described by Lawrence, everything we had to do in order to minimize the demand, maximize or minimize also the costs, getting financing in place, having a very close interaction with our customer. And the way Macquarie helped here was very well regarded by our customers. And we gained a lot of credibility here. during this crisis time. On the other hand, we use this time to further develop our strategy, and we have drawn up a strategy to become the sustainable chemical, pharma, industrial park in Europe, with a more resilient, with a sustainable and a competitive environment. Why is it so remarkable? Because it was really in the time of great urgency, in the time of a crisis, that our customers, and then when we decided together with Macquarie to invest a 3 million digit investment plan in the transformation of our energy fleet, when no one knows how this will develop in the future. And we can only do this because we believe in the future together with Macquarie in these great plans here, in this great area, first of all, and because of our customers were willing to give long-term commitments to go this route. Of course, it's not all about investments. We are also doing energy efficiency or efficiency measures at the same time, bringing our assets in order, doing a lot of fund measures, as we call them. But the energy transformation is our biggest task, what we have to bear in mind.
Okay, and just staying with that example of Germany, because I think it's very interesting and going a little bit outside business into the wider context. So you've just had a new federal election in Germany. We've had the European Commission on releasing the Clean Industrial Deal. There clearly is a wider political element to what's going on at the moment. You know, the word recession, economic stagnation, etc. What do you see the political leaders having to deliver to you as a business manager to make things work, to reduce administration, to get energy prices back on track? What do they need to do?
How much time do we have?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think, first of all, we need a joint assessment of our current economic situation. Why do I say so? Our outgoing chancellor still believes that we do not have any deindustrialization ongoing in Germany. And unfortunately, in comparison to what David just pointed out, our president has more influence here than on a federal level than our states do. Then our first, second, and third priority lies on bringing down the energy costs to a competitive level. Everything which comes thereafter, and of course the list is long and it's not new for you. If I just say, of course, an acceleration of the renewable energy expansion, a capacity market to secure backup capacity, optimize investment for infrastructure grid, a more stable regulatory framework, a fiscal reliability, and if it's really Christmas today, I would also wish myself less bureaucracy. But coming back on what is really needed for us is to bring our energy costs down. The new government have made some clear statements that they understood. Let's see how they will then nail it down into actual plans. And for us, electricity is only the second priority. This is, when you talk about energy, most people talk about electricity. As I said, for us, steam is produced out of, in the past it was coal, now it's gas and e-boilers. And so we need really a solution for what comes with gas. Is it then hydrogen in the second step? Is it CCS? We do not believe that hydrogen will be competitive for years to come, until the 2040s and on, at least for us as a main energy consuming industry. It might be different if it's on a lower percentage of your value chain. And therefore for us it's very important to have an alternative using natural gas, and how do we still nail down or how do we realize the decarbonization phase? And for us, CCAS will be becoming more and more important, and that's what we are elaborating at the moment.
Right, okay, very interesting. So sitting to the left of you, you've got Laurence, who sits on with Siemens and Voltalia, so both on the industrial kit side and the renewables development side. So how do you think those companies in both parts of that value chain, how can they, with renewables deployment or gas deployment or grid deployment, how can they bring down that cost? Is it simplification? Is it administration? Or is it grid? What can be done?
So I would say that despite what people think, it's still a multi-local business, the energy business. And it's very linked to the political environment on the one hand, and also to bottlenecks that you might have within a region and the consumption and production locally. So as an example, if at the next French election, Marine Le Pen and her government come to pass, I think there will be no wind development in France for some time. And so we are subject to the vagaries of regulatory and political wishes. What can be done is if the grids are grown, and that requires a lot of investment by utilities, supported by governments. The governments support it through permitting and through general allowing the lines to go. So Germany has made some progress, but in the UK, for example, there's a lot of blockage because of not in my backyard, I don't want to see an electrical line, I don't want to see big distribution, and that's not helping. If we had better grid, that would mean we would waste a lot less power. When the wind is blowing, when the sun is shining, and the grid cannot accept it and cannot take it, it just gets curtailed or shut down, and that increases the cost for everybody. If we had a stronger grids and a big program and the permits and the government to support that, I think we would lower the cost of power. Another way to lower that is to invest in storage. There's several ways to do storage. CCS is a way to, have cleaner, but there's also simply battery storage, and that today is not supported by pricing systems enough in Europe. So if you're the first incomer into a new market, you're putting the first battery on the system, then it's okay, you can pay back the investment you've made. But if you're the third, the fourth, or the fifth, it's very difficult to get a payback. But if we had storage, then again, we would waste a lot less electricity, and we would be able to have a lower cost of power. So it requires probably capacity payments or other systems on the part of governments to sustain those kind of systems. So it does require government help. And I would say, if you look at it from a developer standpoint, then negative prices or curtailment hurt your business and your business model, and it makes you a bit more reluctant to invest. If you look at it from the equipment manufacturer standpoint, that's the other side. I mean, they've got the choice. Siemens Energy has got the choice. 3-4 year backlog on grid. Who do I take? Well, the ones that have the funding, all the permits, I'll go there. So multi-local and more supportive grid and storage.
So just staying with you on that point, you mentioned the word localization, yet at the same time, the European market is trying to have a pan-European response to the energy security crisis and sustainability, et cetera, to tackle energy prices throughout Europe. Mark mentioned PPAs earlier on in his introduction as one of the topics from a couple of years back, and we've got Harry doing a panel on it later on this afternoon. And then you mentioned negative prices and how that's affecting the rollout coming through and the challenges that's doing. So in the US, rough estimates seem to be there's about twice as many PPAs as being signed in Europe here. Do you see that dynamic changing in Europe to give you more visibility? And I guess, even outside Europe, you mentioned earlier on in your introduction some of the, Latin America and Africa, and how different is that? And, how does Europe compare to those in terms of that structure?
So Europe has got a fair amount of corporate PPAs. So sure, not as many as in the US, but we don't have the same open space and the same size of megawatt facilities that we can put on the ground. It's, you know, you don't have that capacity to build at scale. So there are a lot of corporate PPAs, and there are also smaller enterprises that get together in that club to buy power. And, you know, Valtalia has done some of those, for example, and has done is one of the biggest provider of corporate PPAs in France, as another example. However, the difficulty is getting projects that match that, because it's the permitting, and so we're back to the permitting and to that. So we could be doing more, even though we don't have the ability to scale in the same way. The other thing I would point is a little bit of a bifurcation between, say, the developed markets and the emerging markets on this, is that in emerging markets, there's such a demand for power, and there's not as high a penetration of renewables on the system, which means that corporate buyers are very happy to sign corporate PPAs, and that could represent 10%, 20% of their needs, and they don't care about the intermittency. But if you're in Europe or the US and you get to a certain level, then you want flat power, or you don't want the intermittency. So how do you deal with that? Either you need aggregators, or you need storage, or you need trading. So it's a different business model that needs to be put in place to allow for firm power as opposed to intermittent power, I would say. And that's a shift, and that's where I see a bifurcation between developed world and emerging markets, where they will take whatever they can get.
Take anything, yeah. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So Tim, as I understand it, you're actually, not you personally, but your company is an energy supplier as well, and you have customers that you've got to meet their needs. Historically, those needs have been very focused around clean energy and such like. I mean, how easy is it to practically deliver those, and what do the customers want from your side?
Very, very interesting. Our customers like Bayer, like Covestro, Lanxess, Ineos, they all communicated to the market and promised to the market their decarbonization timeframe, and said by when they want to become neutral and in what dimension. And when they come back from the press conference, they turn around and say, and now, Currenta, you need to deliver, because we are their main energy supplier, and we have most of their Scope 2 and emissions. Therefore, the vision of MAM and the Macquarie and Currenta to form here a sustainable chemical park for the future is shared by our customer. That is very important. On the other hand, currently there is no willingness to pay a green premium for chemical products. And our customers are currently in an economic situation where they cannot afford just to do it then by themselves if the market is not asking for it. Our strategy, therefore, is to, and we are just executing the strategy, is to convert our power plant fleet in the most cost-effective way, but we leave it to the customer how much PPAs, how much biogas, and by when they want to bring this into the new fleet. So they can either operate it on a more cost level, or they can have already green steam, green electricity in the speed they need it. And we need to, of course, the fleet needs to be earlier ready in order for them whenever they shift around. And they gave long-term commitments, as I said, for these investments, and that is and therefore we have a joint approach here. This allows a fast track for part of them, and they already booked with us PPAs. We already have green gas contracts now in preparation, but not for, let's say, not yet for 70 or 60% or 50, even 50%.
So again, just staying with you there, we've got some consultations coming up in Germany within the industrial groups, as I understand it. We all love a consultation. So I think automotive's going on at the moment, got chemicals coming later in the year. Loaded question. What do you expect to come out of those consultations? Anything, something, nothing?
First of all, let me be positive. The approach for a sectoral approach is, in my view, the right way to go forward. We have very different situation and prerequisites for steel, for chemistry, and so on. So having a view just on chemistry in the future is the right thing. The EU wants to follow this route. Secondly, following a long-term strategy, taking into account what they want to do, taking into account that we have to make big investments is also very smart. We need to do so. My hope, let me put it this way, is that we won't confuse the long-term nature of a strategy with the short-term necessity of coming to decisions and be flexible enough. Yeah, if we're looking at experience like CBAM and others, the time the EU needed in the past to bring in instruments, the time they needed to shift those, to adapt those to a very quickly changing market demand, there we really need to speed up. So strategy, sectoral approach on the one hand, but becoming more flexible, in my view, is what will be very important to discuss with the EU Commission. What's on their agenda reflects to us. It is competitive energy prices, regulatory simplification, infrastructure investment, financial initiatives. This is all what reflects to us, and that's what is needed. Key lessons from the automotive sector, you said, you gave the example, automotive sector. I think the need for swift implementation on the one hand, and the other hand, we need to concentrate again on a supply chain resilience when we're talking about gas supply, we're talking about raw materials. Unfortunately, after the Ukrainian crisis, or during the Ukrainian crisis, we got a lot of support here from the EU. After the Ukrainian crisis, there was not much left. We have to bring this back on the agenda.
Made in Europe, made in the US, made in the UK, made in Germany, made in France, wherever it is. I mean, it just feels like we're in a world where trade barriers are going up every day. And we can talk about, is it bravado, is it real, and all those sort of things. But, it's certainly out there. Is there, there's a risk that this insular approach is really going to affect energy transition when it comes to manufacturing costs, international trade, whether that's electric vehicles, solar panels, and things like that. So, Laurence, I mean, again, drawing on some of your background, both with the Siemens as the industrial and the developers, is it simply that this protectionism is going to add further cost pressures? Is that inevitable, or are there ways around it, or what are you seeing from those businesses?
Well, I would say that from a developer standpoint, for sure, the European or US made are more expensive, 20 to 30%. But we have actually missed the boat on solar panel, in my view. Yeah. Germany and even the rest of Europe had an industry there, but we let it go to the Chinese because we didn't scale up fast enough, and that's now gone. I think, we can't claim that back. The Chinese production is twice what the demand is. The prices are so low. Who wouldn't want to benefit from that? And rebuilding that know-how, I'm not sure we're ever going to catch up on that one. On EVs, I think we might still have a chance. And on wind, we definitely can protect that industry better. So if you look at the big wind manufacturers, the European and US ones, I'm talking Siemens Energy, clearly, but also Vestas and GE. Those are the ones that have the best technologies and that have mass-produced and the biggest fleet out there outside China, and because the Chinese producers are very big in China. But I think we need to see the governments getting resolve around that and supporting those industries before they too go out and we deindustrialize completely Europe, which would be a shame. And also, I mean, we've seen what happens when you have, some governments, be they Chinese or American, in charge that decide to stop all exports or that decide to put tariff barriers. Do we want to be at the mercy of those people producing somewhere else and just suddenly yanking our chain and deciding not to sell to us?
And Tim, for you and your business, the sort of globalization versus localization, protectionism, how does that affect your business? Can you stay isolated, or are you part of a wider world?
We are part of a wider world, and listening to again what David said, he was very calm about the announcement of the federal government. I hear partly the same from my chemical customers who are saying that part of their products are going back and forth over the sea before they become final products. And this is probably not seen. For part of the products, these tariffs will hurt. But we are so much interlinked by now that it's not as easy as a tariff game 30 years ago. That is a different thing today, and I think part of the politicians will see this. We surely have a problem with the lack of a level playing field, but their CBAM does not work for energy prices, not at all. So most of our customers, they do not believe in CBAM or tariff mechanism to protect the German economy. We need to get the energy costs down and then trust on the market. And we have a lot of innovations ongoing. We have a lot of new products on hand. We will fight this in a market context. And this is my clear, keen message for today. We have to get the costs down.
Okay. I can see we've got a couple of minutes left. So just to wrap up, I guess one last question or questions, I guess, is can you both give me one immediate thing that can be tackled in the near term that would make a difference to your business? And then let's end on a positive note after all the challenges that we've put down. What do you see as the opportunity for your businesses going forward? Perhaps again, Laurence, if I start with you.
I think one of the biggest challenges for us would be a flatter or a firm power curve, being able to offer firm power rather than intermittent. That would, clearly grow the renewable market more. And the opportunity is linked to that, which is low-cost batteries is a big opportunity that's here to help get towards that.
Okay, noted. Tim?
For me, of course, first priority remains getting costs down. But on the other hand, I'm quite keen and quite positive about that we still are staying on our road, on our strategy to make this economy in Europe become more sustainable. This has a value in the medium term. And this will definitely has a positive economic effect for not only the energy business, but also for industries, for example, like the chemical industry. This we can see already. China has objectives, for example, at a later stage, but they will come as well. And we see this already today. And the entire movement on the world will go into this direction. And therefore, we have a chance there.
Look, covered some pretty big topics there: competitiveness, administration, simplification, affordability, energy prices, made in Europe. Now, all of those will play out over the next few years, so we'll come back and see how it all ended up. So thank you very much for your time, really insightful.